Valve Accessories and Controls would like to introduce you to the VAC V200 Valve Positioner. The V200 is a high-performance modular positioner that can be configured for a pneumatic signal of 3 to 15 psi or 6 to 30 psi, or is an I2P positioner that can accept a loop-powered 4 to 20 milliamp analog signal in a wide variety of area classifications, general purpose, intrinsically safe, and explosion-proof. Configurations with ATEX and other certifications are available as well. We also offer special versions for high and low temperatures or corrosive environments. The modular design allows for very easy addition of feedback as well as quick, simple maintenance and repair in place on the valve, reducing your downtime and installed cost. This is all without sacrificing world-class performance and nearly universal application on hundreds of valve types and brands. We will start with the most basic configuration, accepting a 3 to 15 psi pneumatic signal. The V200 operates on the force balance principle, where the 3 to 15 psi signal acts on the internal reinforced diaphragm, driving the balance arm against the range spring. When the balance between the signal and the range spring changes, the balance arm moves the pilot valve, directing air to the opening or closing port of the actuator corresponding with the direction of the signal change. As the actuator moves in response, the cam rotates and changes the force exerted on the range spring against the diaphragm. When the force is equalized, the pilot valve will return to center and the positioner will have moved the valve to the desired set point. In the pneumatic signal configuration, the positioner has only one recommended spare part, the pilot valve. The most common positioner failures are caused by water, oil, and debris in the instrument air supply. The pilot valve design allows for easy, fast cleaning, minimizing downtime. Removing the pilot valve requires only a screwdriver. Loosen the pilot valve screw and simply lift it from the positioner. Notice that the screw is retained, preventing loss in the field. The stem of the pilot valve can be carefully removed and the stem and valve body can be cleaned. When reinstalling the pilot valve into the positioner, gently drop it in place with the slot in the stem sliding around the end of the balance arm and tighten the screw. Conversion of the V200 from a pneumatic to an electro-pneumatic configuration is very simple and fast. Remove the pneumatic plate by loosening the two screws. The internal I2P converter has two retained screws as well. Simply drop it in where the pneumatic plate was and tighten the screws. The last step is to insert the supplied plug into the port labeled I on the end of the positioner. Conversion from a pneumatic positioner to an electro-pneumatic positioner is now complete. In this configuration, we now have two spare parts. The pilot valve as mentioned before, and also the I2P module. Removing it and replacing it is as simple as two screws. This can be done even in the field when mounted on the valve. It's always recommended that the positioner have a full set of gauges installed. It makes calibration much easier and more repeatable between different technicians. With the positioner mounted and tubed to the actuator and the actuator in the minimum signal position, the first step is to set the cam. Make sure that there is no air applied to the positioner at this point. Loosen the cam nut locking screw about 2 turns and then loosen the cam nut just enough to let the cam move. Turn the cam slightly so that this dark line indicating the 0 position is centered on the follower bearing. While holding the cam in position, tighten the cam nut finger tight. The cam should stay in place. Tighten the locking screw to lock the cam nut. If there is a small gap between the tip of the cam and the bearing, then the cam is set correctly. Now we can apply air to the positioner's supply port. If the positioner is tubed correctly, the valve will not move when air is applied. A final confirmation that the mounting is mechanically and pneumatically correct, you can move the balance arm away from the positioner housing using a small screwdriver or your finger, and the positioner should move the valve in the opening direction. And when you release the arm, it should return to 0. The I2P has convenient tabs to clip the leads from your loop calibrator to. Open the rubber cover on the calibration port and apply 4 milliamp signal to the positioner. Turn the 0 screw clockwise until the C+ gauge reads above 0 psi. Turn the 0 screw counterclockwise until the C+ gauge just reads 0 psi. You can move the balance arm away from the positioner housing to bump the positioner. Watch the C+ gauge needle and make sure it reaches 0 psi in 3 to 5 seconds. Next, apply 20 milliamps to the positioner. The valve should move toward open. Insert your screwdriver into a slot on the span wheel. Turn the span wheel clockwise until the C- gauge needle reads above 0 psi. Then turn the span wheel counterclockwise until the needle just touches the 0. You can move the balance arm toward the positioner housing to bump the positioner. Watch the C+ gauge needle. It should take 3 to 5 seconds to reach 0 psi. Reduce the signal to 4 milliamps again and confirm that the C+ gauge still reads 0 psi and the calibration is complete. 4 to 20 milliamp loop-powered feedback can be installed at any time, even on a positioner already mounted on a valve in the field. Note, the positioner must be calibrated before feedback is installed. The feedback kit consists of 3 parts: the potentiometer, a drive gear, and a transmitter module. Start the installation by removing this indicator post. Then install a potentiometer by threading the mounting screw into the bottom of the housing. Check that the potentiometer is spring-loaded, like this. Hold the potentiometer gear aside and install a drive gear over the cam nut. The locking screw should engage with this hole. There's a round socket in the bottom of the positioner housing. The bottom of the transmitter module fits in that socket, and this screw here is used to attach the module. The last step is to plug the potentiometer into the transmitter module with a CCW sticker facing up. Connect your loop calibrator to the module's terminal strip and turn it on. This is loop-powered feedback, so remember your calibrator must provide 24-volt DC power as well as be able to read the feedback. You can see the end of the potentiometer shaft through the top of the transmitter module. It has a slot for your screwdriver. With 4 milliamp signal on the positioner, turn the potentiometer until the feedback reads just below 4 milliamps. Now we use the 0 trim potentiometer to fine-tune the feedback to read 4 milliamps. Now we can apply 20 milliamps to the positioner and open the valve. Use the span trim potentiometer to adjust the output to read 20 milliamps. Then we're going to reduce the signal on the valve to 4 milliamps and confirm that our feedback still reads 4 milliamps. Calibration is complete. Reinstall the indicator post and the indicator before replacing the cover. The V200 can also accommodate 2 limit switches. Mechanical single pole double throw and proximity switches are both available for general purpose applications. The switches will be mounted on a plate. There will also be a cam assembly and a bolt. Note that the positioner must be calibrated before feedback is installed. Installation begins with removing the indicator and the indicator post. The switch plate is secured with 3 screws. To install the cam, put the bolt through the cam assembly, drop it onto the spindle, and make sure that the cam is engaged in the slot in the spindle, then tighten the bolt. The cams are set using the same screwdriver we've used for everything else so far. Simply insert the screwdriver into the slot in the cam and turn. The cams are self-locking when the screwdriver is removed. Usually the bottom switch indicates closed and the top switch indicates open. The cams are infinitely adjustable. With 4 milliamps on the positioner, we can set the bottom cam by turning it until we hear the bottom switch click. Then I'm going to put 20 milliamps on the positioner to open the valve, and I'll put my screwdriver in the top cam and turn it until I hear that click that the top switch is made. Now we've set the switches. Now that the switches are set, you can install the indicator on the top of the cam bolt. The indicator post you removed is no longer used. The V200 is very easy to troubleshoot, even while mounted on a valve. Using one 0 to 30 psi gauge mounted here on the side of the positioner, you can determine if the I2P is working correctly, and determine if you need to replace it or if the pilot valve is dirty and needs to be either cleaned or replaced. Note that even with 4 to 20 milliamp feedback and switches installed, the I2P module and the pilot valve are easily accessible and replaceable. To determine if the I2P is operating properly, we're going to put 4 milliamp signal on the positioner, and this gauge should read approximately 3 psi. When we put 20 milliamp signal on the positioner, this gauge should read approximately 15 psi. If we've got 3 psi and 15 psi at 4 and 20 milliamps, we know that the I2P is operating properly. If this signal gauge does not read correctly, then the I2P needs to be replaced. Nearly all failures are related to contaminated air. Most often, it's water and or oil in the air supply. If the I2P needs to be replaced, it's as simple as removing these two screws and lifting the I2P out. If feedback is installed, remember to unplug the potentiometer first and note whether or not the plug was sticker up or sticker down. If the I2P tests okay using the previous procedure, then the problem will be a contaminated pilot valve. Note there's a cutout here in the switch plate that allows access to the pilot valve screw. Simply loosen the screw and you'll be able to lift the pilot valve out to replace it. After removing the pilot valve, you can remove the stem from the body to examine it. If the gold plating is in good condition with no worn spots, clean the stem and the body using a good solvent like electrical contact cleaner. After it's clean, reinsert the stem into the valve body and it should move very, very freely. If there's any binding, the stem is bent and the pilot valve needs to be replaced. Note that the pilot valve should be clean and dry. No lubrication is required. Even small amounts of oil or contaminants will affect the performance. When replacing the pilot valve in the positioner, make sure the slot in the stem of the pilot valve slides down along the end of the balance arm here before securing it with the screw. We recommend that after replacement of the I2P or a pilot valve, that the 0 of the positioner be confirmed. No additional calibration should be required. For more information, please contact Valve Accessories and Controls. And thank you.